The fluorescent lights hummed above the tense silence of the conference room. It was 9:47 p.m., long past when anyone wanted to be there, and yet no one dared to move. The manager, Paul Grayson, leaned back in his chair, his tie loosened just enough to suggest authority without comfort. On the whiteboard behind him, a cryptic equation sprawled across the surface like a riddle carved into stone. He smirked. "Solve this," he said, tapping the marker against the board, "and the promotion is yours." The air thickened with exhaustion and resentment. His team, analysts, engineers, people who hadn't seen their families in days, exchanged uncertain glances. The puzzle looked absurd, intentionally cruel. Numbers and symbols arranged to impress, not enlighten. It wasn't a test of intelligence. It was a test of submission. Paul enjoyed moments like this. He liked the way people squirmed when they didn't know an answer. He liked power more than truth. From the back of the room, the janitor moved quietly, emptying the trash bins one by one. No one noticed him. The hum of the vacuum was just another part of the background noise. But his eyes lingered on the whiteboard. Something about the equation made him pause. The analysts muttered theories. "It's unsolvable," one whispered. "He just wants to humiliate us." Another sighed, rubbing her temples. "Why do we even play his games?" Paul grinned wider. "Come on, people, I thought I hired the best." The janitor adjusted his cart, pretending to clean near the board. Under the buzz of fluorescent light, he studied the numbers. His brow furrowed, not from confusion but recognition. He'd seen this structure before. The symmetry, the hidden sequences. It was elegant in a way the manager didn't understand. It wasn't random. It was art disguised as arrogance. Paul clapped his hands. "No one? Fine. Maybe next quarter's promotion will go to someone who actually thinks." Laughter, forced and nervous, filled the room. The janitor's hand tightened on the broom handle. He wanted to speak, but he didn't. Not yet. As the employees packed their laptops and shuffled out, one paper slid off the table and landed at his feet. He picked it up. The same equation stared back at him, taunting, familiar. He hesitated only a moment before slipping it into his pocket. Tomorrow, he thought, he'd come back early, because deep inside, beneath years of silence and mops and empty hallways, something long buried had just awakened, and it was whispering one thing: "You can solve this." The morning after the challenge, the office gleamed with artificial light and empty pride. The same walls that had witnessed arrogance the night before now stood silent, cold, indifferent. By the time the first analysts trickled in, the floors already shone, waxed and spotless. At the far end of the hallway, Eli Turner pushed his cleaning cart. His uniform hung loose on his thin frame, his gray hair neatly tied back. He moved with quiet precision, the kind of grace that comes from repetition, not joy. Every sound mattered: the squeak of his shoes, the soft slosh of water in the bucket, the rhythm of invisibility. Eli had been the janitor here for almost 6 years. Most people didn't know his last name. Some didn't even know his first. To them, he was just part of the building, like the clock that ticked but no one noticed. But once, a long time ago, his name had echoed through university halls. Professor Eli Turner, Department of Mathematics, University of Michigan. Back then, his lectures had drawn standing room-only crowds. He'd spoken about beauty hidden in numbers, how logic could feel like poetry. He'd believed in truth, and that belief had cost him everything. He hadn't expected to see that equation again. Yet last night, staring at the manager's challenge, he'd recognized the pattern instantly. It wasn't Paul Grayson's creation. It was his. A version of it anyway, modified just enough to look original. But he knew the core design, the asymmetric loops, the recursive trick at the end. It was a problem he'd published 15 years ago, under a paper that later vanished from the university archives after his career imploded. As Eli polished the glass doors, his reflection looked back at him. Tired eyes, steady hands, the ghost of a man who once solved the unsolvable. He didn't want revenge, not yet. What he wanted was understanding. How did Grayson find his work? And more importantly, why now? When the clock struck 10, Paul strutted into the building, coffee in hand, arrogance intact. "Morning, Turner," he said casually, the first time he'd ever used Eli's name. Eli nodded politely. "Morning, sir." Paul smirked. "Heard you took one of my puzzle sheets last night. Doing a little mental exercise, huh?" His tone dripped with condescension. "Careful, those numbers bite." Eli smiled faintly. "Numbers don't bite, sir. They reveal." For a brief moment, Paul froze, thrown off by the confidence in that quiet voice. But he brushed it off with a laugh and walked away. When he was gone, Eli returned to the empty conference room. The whiteboard still bore the equation, taunting the air. He uncapped a dry marker, rewrote a few lines from memory and stared at them. The logic unfolded naturally, like breathing. The solution was there, waiting for someone who truly understood its pulse. Outside, the office buzzed with gossip and ambition. Inside, Eli stood alone, invisible once more, except to the truth written before him. And as he erased the final symbol, he whispered to himself, "Let's see what you've stolen, Paul." He wasn't cleaning floors anymore. He was uncovering a theft. By the time night fell again, the office had returned to its familiar rhythm of silence, the kind that only exists after ambition goes home. The fluorescent hum filled every empty corridor as Eli Turner pushed his cart toward the same conference room. The same whiteboard waited, its equation half erased like a confession written in chalk. He closed the door behind him. Outside, the city of Chicago buzzed through the glass, red taillights, distant horns, the faint echo of a siren slicing through the cold. Inside, the air felt different, alive. The janitor, broom in one hand, marker in the other, stood at the edge of two worlds, the forgotten man, and the mathematician he used to be. He studied the equation again. At first glance, it looked like a simple optimization problem, a neat trick for engineers or data analysts. But as Eli examined the structure, something darker shimmered beneath it. The pattern wasn't just familiar, it was identical to the one he'd designed for his final research paper. The same paper that had been discredited after his former mentor accused him of plagiarism. He'd lost everything after that, his tenure, his reputation, his family's respect. But he'd always known the accusation was false. And now, here it was again. His work, his design, his signature, hidden inside a petty office stunt. He whispered to the empty room, "You didn't even change the constants." He took a seat, uncapped the marker, and began to write. Slowly, methodically. His handwriting was steady, elegant, a muscle memory untouched by time. Line after line, the puzzle unfolded, its deceptive simplicity peeling away to reveal something far more intricate. There it was, the recursive loop that no algorithm could solve unless one understood the human logic behind it. It wasn't just numbers. It was intuition disguised as math. That was his trademark. And suddenly, a realization struck him like electricity. If Paul Grayson had this equation, he had access to Eli's old research files. Files that should have been buried after the university scandal. Files no one should have been able to retrieve. Eli's pulse quickened. He erased part of the board and rewrote the central variable, testing a different path. The numbers collapsed into clarity, the solution emerging with haunting beauty. Then came the twist, the discovery hidden inside the equation itself. It wasn't a normal optimization puzzle. It encoded a second layer of data, a signature hash, a mathematical watermark embedded in the constants, a fingerprint, and it was his. Eli froze. He'd embedded that signature in all his published work years ago, proof that he'd been its original author. No one else could have known it was there. He dropped the marker, breath shallow. Paul hadn't just stolen an equation, he'd stolen a piece of Eli's past, and unknowingly carried the evidence of that theft straight into his own downfall. From the hallway came footsteps. Eli wiped the board clean in an instant, returning to his mop as the door creaked open. "Still here, Turner?" Paul's voice echoed. "Man, do you ever sleep?" Eli smiled faintly. "Only when there's nothing left to clean." Paul chuckled and left. As the door clicked shut, Eli turned back toward the blank whiteboard, his eyes sharp, alive again. Tomorrow, he thought, the real work begins. Because this puzzle wasn't just about a promotion anymore. It was about truth, and justice disguised as mathematics. The next morning broke gray and heavy, the city's skyline wrapped in fog. Inside the building, the hum of computers and clatter of keyboards masked the sound of memory creeping back into Eli Turner's mind. As he wiped down the hallways, fragments of the past surfaced, like static from an old radio that refused to stay silent. 15 years ago, he had stood before a lecture hall filled with students who hung on his every word. Mathematics, he'd told them, isn't about numbers, it's about truth. Every equation is a confession. His voice had carried confidence then, but that was before the betrayal. Dr. Leonard Price, Eli's mentor, the man who'd once called him the brightest mind in a generation. Together they'd worked on groundbreaking algorithms, models that could predict human decision-making through nonlinear logic. It was abstract, beautiful work, and dangerous to those who valued control more than truth. When the university's funding came under review, Leonard had made a choice. He'd taken Eli's research, rewritten the authorship, and framed him for academic fraud. Eli's world had collapsed in a week. Papers retracted, reputation obliterated, marriage strained to silence. He had walked out of that university with nothing but a box of notebooks and a promise to himself never to touch math again. And yet here it was, resurrected by a smug manager with no idea of the history he was standing on. As Eli buffed the lobby floors, he caught sight of Paul Grayson through the glass conference room wall. The man was laughing with a group of executives, retelling his famous puzzle story, playing the role of the clever leader. Eli watched, his expression unreadable, but inside the fire was spreading. He knew now that Paul must have gotten the equation through Leonard Price. The connection was too precise to be coincidence. That meant the ghosts of his past weren't buried. They were thriving in suits and corner offices. During lunch break, Eli sat alone in the janitor's closet, a cramped space smelling faintly of bleach and loneliness. He unfolded the stolen sheet of paper again, tracing each line of the equation with a trembling finger. In the margin, something caught his eye, a faint note in pencil, almost erased. LP. Leonard Price. Eli's breath hitched. His suspicion was now certainty. Paul hadn't even bothered to remove Leonard's initials. The sound of footsteps approached, hurried, nervous. The door opened slightly, and a young intern, Mia, peeked in. "Hey, Mr. Turner," she said softly. "You, left this on your cart." She handed him a small envelope. Inside was a folded memo addressed to Paul Grayson marked "Confidential." It had been accidentally clipped to Eli's cleaning report. He opened it carefully and froze. The memo was from Dr. Leonard Price, now a consultant for the company's analytics division. It read, "Glad you're putting the model to use. Just make sure no one asks where it came from. If that name ever resurfaces, bury it." Eli's pulse thundered in his ears. The betrayal wasn't over. It was repeating itself in real time. He folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and stared into the dim light of the closet. The ghosts were no longer whispers. They had names, faces, and business cards. For the first time in years, Eli felt something dangerous stirring. Purpose. He stood up, straightened his uniform, and whispered to himself, "You wanted to bury me, Leonard. Let's see how deep you dug." The janitor wasn't just cleaning up after the powerful anymore. He was preparing to expose them. The office was silent again by midnight. Only the low hum of servers and the faint tick of a wall clock broke the stillness. Eli Turner stood in the conference room under the sterile glare of fluorescent lights, his mop abandoned by the door. On the whiteboard, he'd redrawn the equation from memory, every line, every symbol, perfect. This time he wasn't cleaning floors. He was reclaiming his name. Outside, snow began to fall against the glass, scattering light into soft fragments. Eli's breath fogged the air as he leaned closer to the board, his reflection ghosting beside the numbers. The problem wasn't difficult anymore. Not for him. It was familiar, like a melody he'd written long ago and nearly forgotten how to play. He started to write. The marker squeaked across the surface in a rhythm only mathematicians understood. Part logic, part instinct, part confession. He filled the board with shapes of thought, linking lines that no algorithm could predict. Each stroke brought back pieces of his former self, the professor who used to explain beauty and logic, the dreamer who saw equations as art, the man who believed in truth no matter how painful it became. Hours passed unnoticed. The snow outside thickened. Eli's mind moved faster, his hands steadier. He wasn't just solving the puzzle, he was decoding a theft. The deeper he went, the more the hidden message revealed itself. The constants that once seemed arbitrary now aligned perfectly with his personal signature, a mathematical encryption technique he'd invented to protect his original work. And there it was, a hidden proof, embedded within the formula itself. 3 letters, E.T., concealed in the structure of the recursive loop. His initials, undeniable evidence of authorship. He dropped the marker, heart pounding. Paul Grayson's brilliant puzzle wasn't just stolen. It was plagiarized directly from Eli's work, proof written in the language of numbers that no court could deny. Eli exhaled, a sound somewhere between relief and rage. For years he'd hidden in plain sight, carrying the weight of a lie too big to fight. But tonight the equation had spoken. It had vindicated him. He printed the solution, documenting every step. His handwriting, neat, deliberate, meticulous. Then he wrote a single sentence beneath the final answer. Original model authored by Dr. Eli Turner, University of Michigan, 2010. The clock read 3:18 a.m. when he finished. He placed the papers neatly on the conference table and turned off the lights. As he walked down the hall, he passed a glass wall reflecting his silhouette. Mop in hand, uniform faded, eyes alive. For the first time in years, he didn't see a janitor. He saw the man he used to be, the one who believed in truth even when the world turned its back. But as he reached the exit, his phone buzzed. A single text from an unknown number lit the screen. You shouldn't have touched that equation. Eli froze. The message was unsigned. He looked back toward the darkened conference room. Somewhere inside, someone was still watching. The puzzle was solved. But the game, the real game, had only just begun. The next morning, the building pulsed with its usual rhythm, the buzz of ambition, the clack of keyboards, the hollow laughter of people pretending everything was fine. But beneath that hum, something had shifted. By 8 a.m., word spread through the office like static. The janitor solved it. At first, no one believed it. The story sounded absurd. A quiet old man, broom in hand, cracking the unsolvable equation that had humiliated an entire team. But there it was, right on the conference table. The solution printed cleanly, signed, and time-stamped. Paul Grayson's puzzle, answered in full by Eli Turner. Paul stormed into the room, coffee sloshing over his hand. He scanned the board, the papers, his jaw tightening. He could feel eyes on him, whispers circling like vultures. Who put this here? He demanded. Eli did, said Mia, the young intern, her voice steady but cautious. He stayed late last night. Paul froze. The janitor? Yes, sir. He snatched the pages and skimmed them, then stopped. The math was flawless. Every line, every step. It wasn't just correct, it was elegant, even poetic. And then, at the bottom, that single sentence, original model authored by Dr. Eli Turner, University of Michigan, 2010. The color drained from his face. He dropped the pages onto the table. Who told him about this equation? No one answered. The silence was heavier than truth. By noon, word had reached the upper floor. The company's analytics director, Ms. Cole, called an emergency meeting. The executives gathered, papers in hand, eyes darting between Grayson and the mysterious janitor who had outsmarted him. When Eli was summoned, he entered quietly, uniform crisp, posture calm. He stood before them, not defiant, not timid, simply present. Mr. Turner, Ms. Cole began. Did you write this? Eli nodded once. Yes, ma'am. And can you explain how you arrived at the solution? He did. Not with arrogance, but with clarity, guiding them through the logic, the symmetry, the hidden pattern that transformed the impossible into the inevitable. The executives leaned in, entranced. Even those who barely understood math could feel the elegance of it. When he finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then, Ms. Cole spoke again, softly, almost reverently. "This equation, it's not company property, is it?" Eli hesitated. "No, it was mine. 15 years ago, it was taken by someone who knew me." Paul's throat tightened. "That's ridiculous. I got it from a consultant, Dr. Price." At the mention of that name, Eli's gaze sharpened. "Leonard Price," he said quietly. "He was my mentor." The executives exchanged looks. Ms. Cole opened her tablet, scrolling rapidly. "Dr. Price is still under contract with our analytics division," she said. "He supplied this formula 6 months ago, said it was part of his proprietary research." The revelation hit the room like thunder. Paul tried to speak, but Eli's calm voice cut through the chaos. "Then you've been building your models on stolen work." No one dared breathe. Finally, Ms. Cole leaned back, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Turner? Dr. Turner," she corrected herself. "I believe you just uncovered corporate fraud." Paul's face went pale. "Wait, I didn't know." But his words fell into silence. Eli didn't gloat. He didn't need to. Justice, after all, rarely needed applause, only exposure. As security escorted Paul out for questioning, Eli stood at the glass window, watching the city lights flicker through falling snow. He wasn't triumphant. He was tired, but lighter. For the first time in years, truth had spoken, and people had actually listened. Still, something in him knew this wasn't over. Leonard Price, and the man who'd ruined him, was still out there. And now he knew Eli Turner was back. The snow outside had turned to freezing rain by the time Eli received the call. "Mr. Turner," said Ms. Cole's assistant, voice tight with urgency. "Dr. Leonard Price is here. He insists on meeting you." Eli paused mid-step, the bucket handle cold against his palm. "Here?" "Yes. He says it's a misunderstanding." Eli hung up before the assistant could finish. His pulse steadied, slow, deliberate. He knew this moment would come. When he entered the top-floor conference room, Leonard was already there, framed by the city skyline. Silver hair, expensive suit, the same sharp blue eyes that had once promised mentorship and delivered betrayal. He turned with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Eli," he said smoothly. "It's been a long time." Eli closed the door behind him. 15 years. Leonard chuckled, gesturing toward a chair. "Let's not dramatize it. I see you've been busy, solving puzzles in mop water." Eli didn't sit. "You stole my work again." Leonard sighed. "You always did see theft where there was collaboration." "You walked away, Eli. Someone had to carry the torch." Eli's voice was quiet, steady. "You didn't carry it, you sold it." The older man's eyes hardened. "You think I'd let a janitor's accusation ruin a decade of corporate contracts? Let's be honest. No one believed you then, and no one will now." Eli reached into his pocket and slid a printed document across the table. The solution, annotated, detailed, and at the bottom, the mathematical signature embedded in the constants. His name, written in logic itself. Leonard picked it up, scanning quickly. And for the first time, Eli saw fear flicker in his eyes. "This," Eli said softly, "proves the model is mine. It proves you've been selling stolen research to corporations for years. The executives already know. They've frozen your contracts." Leonard dropped the papers, mask cracking. "You have no idea what you've done. You think truth wins, Eli. It doesn't. It never did. You'll go back to cleaning floors while people like me keep the world running." Eli stepped closer. "You taught me once that numbers don't lie. Turns out they remember." For a moment, the only sound was the rain tapping the glass. Slow, relentless. Leonard's confidence faltered. "What do you want?" Eli looked out at the skyline, the city glowing with 1,000 indifferent lights. "Nothing from you. You've already taken enough." He turned back, eyes sharp. "But you're going to admit it, in writing. To the university, to this company, to anyone you deceived. You'll clear my name." Leonard laughed bitterly. "And if I don't?" Eli reached into his jacket, pulling out a small flash drive. Then this goes public. Every model you sold, every falsified patent, every stolen line of code, I've documented it all. One click and your career evaporates. Leonard stared at the flash drive, the color draining from his face. Eli didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. This isn't revenge, he said quietly. It's balance. For a long time, Leonard said nothing. Then finally, his shoulders slumped. You were always better than me, he muttered. That's why I had to destroy you. Eli turned to leave. No, you destroyed yourself. As he stepped into the hallway, Ms. Cole was waiting. She met his eyes, respectful now, not condescending. Is it done? Eli nodded. He'll confess. Then maybe it's time you took your place where you belong, she said. We could use someone like you, not just to clean up messes, but to prevent them. Eli gave a faint smile. I've been cleaning messes my whole life. Maybe it's time I start building again. But as he walked away, the storm outside deepened. Somewhere deep down, he knew Leonard Price wasn't finished. Because men like him never surrendered. They recalculated. Morning light bled through the rain-streaked windows, washing the office in a dull silver glow. The storm had passed, but tension still clung to the air like static. Word had spread fast. Leonard Price had confessed. The university issued a formal apology. His corporate contracts were frozen pending investigation. And the name Eli Turner, long buried under dust and rumor, was being spoken again, this time with reverence. When Eli arrived for his shift, people looked up. They nodded. Some even smiled. It was strange, the kind of quiet recognition that made him uneasy. For years he had survived by being invisible. Now every glance felt like a spotlight. Ms. Cole called him into her office. The air inside smelled of polished wood and espresso, not bleach and ammonia. She gestured for him to sit, something no one had done for him here before. Dr. Turner, she began, her tone crisp but warm. We've reviewed everything. The research, the confession, the audit logs. It's clear now that your work was foundational to several of the models our company still uses today. Eli said nothing. He didn't need thanks. He wanted to hear where this was going. We'd like to make it right, she continued. Not with a check, though that's coming, but with an opportunity. She slid a folder across the desk. Senior Data Strategist, 6 figures, benefits, relocation package. You belong here, she said, not behind a mop. Eli stared at the paper. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant hum of the city below. It should have felt like victory. Redemption, full circle. But instead, all he felt was the weight of what it meant. He thought of the years he'd lost, the people he'd stopped calling, the nights spent in silence. He thought of how easily the world forgets those who fall. And he wondered, was this offer truly redemption, or just another form of erasure? Why me? He asked quietly. There are younger minds, people with better resumes. Ms. Cole smiled faintly. Because you see what they can't. You don't just solve equations. You understand the people behind them. That's rare. He looked down at the title again. Senior Data Strategist. It sounded powerful, clean. But in his reflection on the polished desk, he still saw the janitor's uniform. May I think about it? He asked. Of course, she said. Take your time. But know this. You've earned far more than a paycheck. You've earned your name back. He nodded, thanked her, and stepped out into the hall. The offer felt like sunlight after years underground, warm but blinding. As he walked past the cubicles, whispers followed, some admiring, some envious. But it wasn't the attention that unsettled him. It was the question beneath it all. If he accepted, what would he become? That night, he sat in his small apartment overlooking the river. The city lights shimmered across the glass, reflecting both worlds he'd lived in, one of intellect, one of humility. On the table beside him lay 2 things, the job offer and his old university ID, faded and cracked. He turned them over in his hands, weighing one against the other. Outside, the wind carried faint echoes of the past, lecture halls, chalk dust, applause, and the quiet hum of vacuum cleaners in empty buildings. Eli whispered to himself, redemption isn't given, it's chosen. And as midnight crept closer, he knew he would have to choose soon. But deep down, in the calm before that decision, he sensed something else. That Leonard Price's confession might not be the end. Because in stories like his, peace never came without one last test. The city awoke under a pale winter sun, the streets glistening with thin sheets of ice. Inside his small apartment, Eli Turner sat at his kitchen table, staring at the job offer again. The paper was crisp, official, promising everything he'd once wanted: respect, stability, recognition. But the longer he looked, the heavier it felt. He'd dreamed of this once, years ago, when he believed that intellect alone could rewrite destiny. Before betrayal, before the silence, before the long nights scrubbing floors while others profited from his brilliance. Now, with the offer in hand, he felt a strange unease, as if stepping back into that world meant losing something he'd quietly earned in his exile: humility, peace, perspective. The knock on the door broke his thoughts. It was Mia, the young intern who had first believed in him. She stood shivering, holding 2 coffees. "Sorry to drop by," she said, smiling shyly. "I just wanted to see how you're doing." Eli gestured her in. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," she said. "Everyone at the office is talking about you. They say you might be taking the strategist job." He smiled faintly. "Is that what they're saying?" She hesitated. "You deserve it, after what they did to you, but—" She trailed off. "But?" he prompted. Mia bit her lip. "Just don't let them use you again. People like Grayson and Price, they'll always find a way to turn genius into currency. You're more than that." Her words lingered long after she left. Eli spent the day walking the city, past the university gates where his career had ended, past the skyscraper where it had begun again. Everywhere he went, he saw reflections of his 2 lives. A professor, a janitor, a man caught between intellect and humility. That evening, he stood on the bridge overlooking the frozen river. The city lights shimmered across the ice like fractured memories. He thought of Ms. Cole's offer, of Mia's warning, of Leonard's last bitter words. "You think truth wins? It doesn't. Maybe truth didn't always win, but maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe survival wasn't about victory. It was about integrity." He took out his phone and dialed Ms. Cole. "Dr. Turner," she answered quickly. "Have you decided?" "Yes," he said softly. "I have." He paused, looking out at the city that had both buried and resurrected him. "I appreciate the offer, but I can't take it." Silence on the line, then disbelief. "Eli, this is a chance to rebuild everything." "I don't need to rebuild what's already whole," he interrupted gently. "You have brilliant people there. Let them build the future. My place is somewhere else." Ms. Cole's tone softened. "Then what will you do?" He smiled faintly. "Teach, not in a university, not for money, just teach." He hung up and exhaled, watching his breath curl into the cold air. The choice felt right. Quiet, steady, powerful. He didn't need revenge. He didn't need applause. He needed purpose. As he walked home, snow began to fall again, soft and slow. He passed a small community center with a flickering sign: "Evening tutoring program. Volunteers needed." He stopped, stared, then smiled. The door creaked as he stepped inside, warmth and laughter spilling into the night. Dozens of kids bent over notebooks, pencils scratching, faces lit with curiosity. Eli rolled up his sleeves. "Who wants to learn something impossible?" A few hands shot up. He grinned. "Good. Those are my favorite kinds of problems." And in that small, fluorescent-lit room, far from academia, far from greed, Eli Turner finally reclaimed what no promotion could ever offer him: peace. The snow had returned, blanketing Chicago in a quiet calm that muted the noise of the world. Months had passed since Eli Turner had turned down the corporate offer. The company moved on, new executives, new projects, and the headlines that once buzzed with scandal had faded into the background hum of modern life. But in a small community center tucked between a laundromat and a cafe, Something extraordinary was happening. Every evening after the working day ended, the lights in room 12 flickered on. Inside, children and teenagers filled the worn desks, notebooks open, pencils ready. At the front stood Eli, no longer Dr. Turner, no longer the janitor, just Eli. He explained equations with stories instead of jargon, connecting math to music, to rhythm, to the hidden beauty of patterns in everyday life. His voice was calm, patient, kind, the voice of someone who had learned that understanding was more powerful than recognition. Numbers don't make you smart, he told them one night. They make you curious. That's where real intelligence begins. The students adored him. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood, the quiet teacher who made the impossible feel simple. Some of the parents knew his past, whispered about it in the hallways. That's the professor they ruined years ago. But Eli didn't correct them. His past no longer needed defending. Truth had already done that for him. One evening, Mia stopped by. She was no longer an intern, now part of the analytics team, thriving under Ms. Cole's mentorship. She watched from the doorway as Eli guided a young boy through a geometry problem, his patience unwavering. When the class ended, she approached him. "You did it," she said softly. "You rebuilt your life." Eli smiled, wiping chalk from his hands. "No," he said. "I just stopped trying to rebuild the wrong one." She laughed quietly, emotion catching in her throat. "The company still talks about you. Ms. Cole says they renamed one of the internal models, the Turner framework." He looked surprised, then amused. "They did? She thought it was time your name stood for truth again." Eli looked down, thoughtful. "Maybe, but I don't need my name in code anymore. I see it here." He gestured toward the classroom where kids' laughter still echoed. Every time they solved something they thought they couldn't. As she left, Eli turned back to the board, where a faint equation still lingered in chalk. He stared at it for a moment, not as a challenge, but as an old friend. Then he erased it, leaving the slate clean. Outside, the snow fell heavier now, swirling under the streetlights. Eli walked home through the quiet, his breath forming soft clouds in the freezing air. The city around him glittered, sharp edges softened by winter's mercy. He thought about Leonard Price, now disgraced, forgotten, about Paul Grayson, last seen begging for consulting work, and about how easily arrogance devours itself. But he didn't feel triumph, only a deep, still peace. Because in the end, redemption wasn't about proving the world wrong. It was about proving to yourself that you could stand again, without bitterness, without fear. As he reached his apartment door, Eli looked back once at the falling snow. The world was quiet now. The noise was gone. And somewhere inside that stillness, he finally heard what he'd been waiting to hear for 15 years. Silence that didn't ache. He smiled. The janitor who solved the impossible hadn't just won back his name. He'd rewritten the meaning of success itself.